Let's talk about my most versatile piece of gear that is so secretive that I didn't post anything in the subject line, in the description, in the thumbnail, or anywhere else. But first, how's it going, guys? My name is Dave, and this channel is called Off Grid. And on this channel, I like to talk about all things backpacking, hiking, camping, and gear. Let's just get right into it. It is my most favorite piece of gear for a lot of different reasons that I'm going to get into, and it's this guy right here. And you might not be able to tell just by looking at it. You might be thinking, well, is that like a tarp or something like that? Well, it is, but it's also so much more. It is the hotly contested and debatable poncho slash tarp. Now, this is a piece of gear that a lot of people don't end up using when they go into the backcountry, but I actually love it, and let me tell you why. Here is my claim for why the poncho is one of the best pieces of gear that hardly anybody is using out there. The first reason that I have for you guys, I actually have, I think, around like 6 or 7, but the first reason that I have for you guys is for the obvious, right? Let's get the obvious out of the way right now. It is for rain protection, right? So it's for yourself, right? But it also protects your backpack behind you, and then it also drapes further down in front of you as well. So it's not only protecting your head, your body, and your backpack, but it's also going down farther than, let's say, your traditional rain jacket would go. So it's going to end up going closer to right around your knees, so it gives you the maximum amount of rain protection on yourself, on your person, when you're out there. But obviously, like I just mentioned too, you can also set it up in more of what's called a tarp, or just like an overhang kind of mode, which basically means that you know, when you're in a pinch or when you're at camp and you want to do something but it's downpouring rain out, this thing actually splays out and has a decent amount of coverage. It's not going to be like a traditional tarp where it's going to be like a 7x7 or a 10x10 foot tarp, but it's going to give you at least a little bit of protection when you're at camp, when you're trying to do some camp chores or whatever and it's raining out. It's going to give you that added protection. The next one that I want to get into here is going to be the protection from the wind. So when you're at camp and it's really windy out, a lot of people just hunker down in their tents, but what ends up inevitably happening is when it's really breezy out, you're going to hear your tent just flapping all around, and it's going to prevent you from getting a decent night's sleep. Well, if you have your handy poncho slash tarp available, what you can end up doing is setting this up in sort of like a lean-to option for you, which basically means you can run it directly into the ground and have it come up off of the ground, maybe like a few feet away from your tent, to act as an additional wind barrier when you're out there. So you're still going to hear stuff kind of flapping around, but as long as it's not directly related to your tent wall, or you can minimize the overall wind damage that's happening to your tent wall when you're out there, it might give you a little bit more peace of mind when you're out there. Or if you're just sitting around camp, you can protect yourself and break that wind a little bit more. Did I just say break that wind? So the next one that I have for you guys is going to be another form of protection that you might not have thought about, and that is going to be from the sun. So the sun's rays are obviously something that we're always trying to cover up, and use sunscreen and use things like hats and other things when we're out there. But let's say you're camping in an overly exposed area where there's not a lot of tree coverage at all. It, you know, might be minimal to none at all when you're out there. So what do you do in those scenarios? Maybe you're desert camping or something like that, where you're not going to really be able to find that much protection from the sun's rays. Well, if you have your handy poncho slash tarp available, again, you can set this up in more of that tarp mode, and that's going to be able to, especially if you can have something that jacks it up off the ground a little bit, or even if you just have your trekking poles, you can get that sun off you a little bit, and it's not only going to keep you cooler, but it's also going to protect you from those harsh rays, right? The next one that I have for you, as far as like the great uses of this poncho slash tarp, is going to be as a ground sheet for your tent. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this as the only ground sheet that you're going to use, but I primarily don't usually like to use a ground sheet to begin with. I have a little bit longer of a closed cell foam type of pad that I like to put underneath my inflatable sleeping pad when I'm sleeping at night. However, if the ground is particularly rocky, or there's a bunch of like twigs and bushes and whatever else that's kind of just littering around your camp, and you're not able to really clean up everything, you know what I mean. If you're out there and the ground underneath you doesn't look particularly great for a campsite, in a pinch you can definitely roll this out and make sure obviously that it's tucked under your tent a little bit, but you can definitely use this as a ground sheet in a pinch if you needed to. Another thing that I can throw in here as a great option, sort of going along with the ground sheet but not really, is that you can use it to lay stuff out on, whether it be your gear or anything else. If you need to lay stuff out or look at stuff and you don't want to put it on the bottom of your tent, this can be another great option for that. Or what you can also do is use it as a platform to take like an at-camp shower, right? If you have the means to be able to do kind of like a military shower when you're at camp and you don't want to do it directly on top of the ground, you can lay this out as a waterproof barrier to, you know, just have as that additional platform, right? If you don't want to have stuff on the ground, that's an additional option for you. The next thing that I want to talk about here is going to be the overall price. This is kind of like in the pro category of this, and not only is this my most versatile piece of gear, it's also one of the cheapest pieces of gear that I own. You can pick up one of these guys for about $20 on Amazon. This one I think is from Red Camp, which is a somewhat popular Chinese option. I got a hair in here. But, you know, you can pick these up really cheap on Amazon, and, you know, they range anywhere from, like, I've seen them as low as like $17, $18 for this, you know, style or this model, all the way up to about $25, $26, but definitely super cheap. The next thing I want to bring up here in the pro camp would be the overall breathability, and this is especially if you're comparing this to your more traditional rain jacket here. And what that basically means is that you're able to vent a lot more easily. And some of the more expensive rain jackets you'll see now, they'll have the integrated like pit zips that you can use to like dump more of that heat. But let me tell you guys, you're not going to get any more breathability with overall rain protection than a poncho, particularly because if you're using that tarp / poncho, the sides of it are going to be a little bit more open to begin with. This particular model here has a Velcro style of closure to it, so I can close it up real well on the sides if I really need to block out the most amount of rain possible. But if I want to you know, open it up and have more breathability on that, you know, on the sides, I can dump my body heat a lot more easily with a poncho as compared to your more traditional rain jacket. And the last pro that I have here before I get into some of the cons is going to be something that a lot of people probably have never heard of quite yet, but I'm definitely going to try it out in the field. And that is actually as what I'm dubbing a poop skirt. And what that basically means is when you're doing your biz and your number 2 out in the backcountry, if you want a little bit more privacy, you can actually wrap this around. You can configure it in different ways to try and get a little bit more privacy when you're out there. But you can actually wrap this around a tree and then kind of wrap it around yourself, especially if you have some additional bear line or guy line around it to really like lock that down and basically just provide privacy for your private parts, right? You know, I might do a video in the future of like different style of setups for that. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, let me know down in the comments or click subscribe, because I'm probably gonna end up doing it at some point anyway. But the last thing to kind of recap all of this stuff is going to be the versatility, right? And it's not, I mean, it's not really like an additional pro. It's just kind of like recapping everything that I just mentioned with all of these different uses here. But just the fact that it can do so many different things, right? So let's get into the cons real quick. And there are a few that I have either heard of before or have, you know, personally witnessed with using one of these. And the first of which obviously is the weight. So the penalty here is going to be, especially for this model that I have for this one, it's a little bit longer because this has what they call an updated version, which is an updated sleeve. So it kind of goes and gives you a little bit more coverage on your arms. Some of the older ones were just kind of like a rectangular shape that you threw over yourself. And whether or not it had closures on the side, it may or may not have, but it definitely didn't have a longer sleeve on it. This one has a longer sleeve, which basically means it's going to add a little bit more weight. So on my scale, this one weighs right around 9 ounces versus some of the lightest rain jackets that I've seen are like 4 to 5 ounces. I have a Frog Togs like UL version in the closet over here, and that one is about 6 to 6.5 ounces for a little bit cheaper of an option. So that right there is a few ounces heavier for the Poncho option. However, what I will mention here as a caveat would be that if you're going with a traditional rain jacket, you also have to consider something like a pack liner, which I always carry anyway, as well as a pack cover, unless you want to do, you know, and just like throw your entire faith into having like a Dyneema pack and assuming that it's just going to be waterproof and that it's not going to wet out. But if you add an additional pack cover, duck pack, whatever you want to call it, that might add another couple of ounces on top of like a Frog Togs, which is 6 ounces or so. So that ends up being somewhat close in the ballpark of like 7 to 8 ounces anyway. So if you're looking at it from that perspective and the type of coverage that you get from the Poncho, it's really not that much more in overall weight. The next con that I have is going to be the fact that for as versatile as it is, it's not as versatile in thicker brush, right? So one of the things that I've heard of is if you're doing a little bit more bushwhacking, you're on a trail that's not as wide or as open, and you got a lot of branches and things kind of like sticking out, the more open design of a poncho can end up catching more of those sticks, and it might end up like pulling it out on you, or making you feel like you're not as nimble, or you know, not as quick on your feet, or however you want to put it. But it definitely would snag a little bit more easily. And I'm going to get into a pro tip for that on another point that I'm going to talk about with another one of these cons. But the next con that I heard of is that it's not as easy to throw on when you have your pack on. However, I've tried it multiple times, especially with this one. I don't know if it's just this particular model or what, but even with all the Velcro kind of like latched down on this, I was able to throw it up over my pack no problem. Now, if you have a particularly high pack that comes up like at your head level or even maybe a little bit higher, it might be even harder to kind of throw it over, but my pack doesn't usually go up that high, and I really haven't had that many problems throwing this one up over myself and my pack. And then the last con that I have for you is that I heard that when the wind blows with a poncho, that ends up blowing it all over the place. Now, the pro tip that I have for you here, to round this all out with the other one that I was talking about, with it snagging a little bit more easily, is the very simple fact that you can cut up a bear line or use a different kind of guy line to basically just wrap it around your waist and kind of like fashion yourself a belt with it. And what that's going to end up doing is, you know, kind of locking that down, right? So when the poncho is over you, if you don't have anything wrapped around you, you've got a lot of space that's kind of in the back, and that's what we're talking about with the wind. If you get a gust that kind of comes up underneath you, you can end up throwing that like back up over your head or whatever. So an easy way to remedy that on those colder days is basically to just take a little piece of bear line. I end up cutting a 50-foot bear line into equal parts, and that basically like provides me with additional guy line so that I can use it in more of that tarp mode. But you can also use one of those, you know, guy lines slash bear lines to just wrap it around your waist and eliminate all of those windy gusts that might end up making the use of this a little bit more cumbersome to deal with. But that's basically it, guys. That is my roundup of my most favorite piece of gear. It really gets me jazzed to go out into the backcountry, particularly because of all the different pros that I had mentioned in this video. It really is my most versatile piece of gear. But I know this is a hotly contested and debatable topic, and a lot of people really just don't want to deal with a poncho when they're out in the backcountry. So I want to hear all about it down below in the comments. Do you guys use a poncho? Have you ever tried to use it? Was it too much of a headache for you? Did you dump it and end up going with something like that more traditional rain jacket? I want to hear all about it down below, but you're definitely going to see me using this when I'm on the trail. I have an emergency version of this for like my day hike usage as well. I really just like having the coverage that a poncho provides. So I'm giving it the college try, and I'm definitely going to try to use this as much as I can when I'm out in the field. But thanks so much for watching this week, guys. Really appreciate you. And remember, if you're headed off grid, make sure you do your research and you make it a safe one. I'll see you on the next one.